Call this meeting to order. This is a meeting of the Rules Committee. We'll go around and identify ourselves. Start with you, Elvie.
I'll agree to that.
Dick Trainee from the Assembly. And we're missing one of our members. And Tim Steele is here with us too. And you are on tape, so don't say anything you don't want the world to remember for a long time. And let's see, old business or none, new business. We've got the Citizens Task Force recommendation. And Elvie, I'll turn it over to you. Let's identify recommendations can be codified.
Thank
What
you,
can be
Mr.
policy? And I
Chairman.
think Julie's on her way. Yes, ma'am.
Through the chair, if I just may have a quick moment. The clerk's office has worked with Assemblymember Steele along with the administration to secure a kiosk for the assembly chambers in the lobby area. So hopefully this will be set up towards the end of the year. People will have access to the municipal website, the agenda, and I think one other. So it's limited access only to the more municipal documents that they would need, but that will be available.
Now, is that going to be printable or
No,
not?
there's not a printer associated with
Okay.
it.
I just want
So,
the
and
public to
that's-
know that. They don't, when trying to figure out the cost of money, maybe just for ink and for paper, you should have somebody just keep pushing the buttons.
Yeah.
But this is what you guys asked us for.
Yes, I know, I'm delighted,
So-
thank you.
And we have put signage up, and we'll put signage around the kiosk, that if people need documents, the clerk's office is happy to provide them, but we just want to make sure that they're not already provided.
How soon is this going to be operational? Do we know, Amanda?
It is my understanding that they are working on it. They are working on getting it in, and some other additions over there too, so hopefully by the end of the year or within January.
Yes, Tim.
And hopefully feedback is requested on that in terms of how it works and suggestions for how to modify it or change or update or whatever. So,
Good.
Thank you.
Thank you, Amanda. Go ahead, Elvie.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, I'd just like to say, again, thank you to the Citizens Task Force for your work, and I want you to recognize that it's my goal to move forward as quickly as possible with some of the implementation of some of the recommendations that you brought forward. And with that said, at the last meeting, I took some notes, and I
Want the record to reflect that Ms. Johnston just joined us. Thank you, Jennifer, for being here. Go ahead, Elvie.
And I identified what I believe can be codified, okay? And if you look at page 4 of the Citizens Task Force report, number 3, C, the Assembly has authority to limit the amount of time a person is allocated to testify. The task force recommends a 3-minute time limit for individual speakers and a 5-minute time limit for a designated representative of the community council. That can be put into code, and I intend to make sure it happens. Number E, a sign-up sheet may be employed to facilitate the management of a public hearing, so all who seek to testify may be heard in an orderly manner. It is not a tool to discourage or limit testimony. If the sign-up list is employed, it must be managed by the municipal clerk to ensure fairness. People who signed up can be called in order as individuals or in batches like an airplane boarding process. If a person is not available when called, they do not forfeit their chance to be heard. I believe that this can also be codified, and it should be, and I'm going to move forward on seeing that happens.
I'm sorry, Ellie, can you just remind me what the first one you said was?
The first one is 3C.
Okay, perfect, thank you.
Okay. Let's see. And also, I skipped one. I think that D can be codified too. Not that I want to put, everything and anything in code, but I don't want to have a policy in place and then there's a new assembly and the rules aren't followed. I wanted the rules to be followed in perpetuity. Okay. I skipped number D. The chair may ask members who wish to testify to identify their neighborhood or community council. I think that can be codified. And number F, if a member of the public submits a written request to the municipal clerk for the use of a sign-up list by the close of business the day before a public hearing, this management tool shall be employed. That should be codified. Number H, if the assembly runs out of time to hear all who have come to testify, the assembly continues the public hearing and should identify the date of the continued public hearing at a date as expeditiously as possible. If a sign-up list has been instituted, it continues to be available to anyone who seeks to testify as long as the hearing continues. Hearings may be set for any day of the week. That should be codified. Number J. If the assembly anticipates that a public hearing will draw more people than the assembly chambers can accommodate, the task force recommends that either the William Marston Theater should be set up so people can hear and see the public testimony, or the assembly consider moving the public hearing to a larger public space. Such an action must be widely publicized. That should be codified. Number 4A. When a substitute or S version of an ordinance is introduced, it should be accompanied by a written description of what has been changed from the original version, and the description should be posted on the municipal website. That should be codified. Number 4E. If a member of the public has testified on an ordinance / resolution and an S version has significantly changed the original proposal, that person should be able to testify in a new version. That should be codified. And I think that's it as far as my recommendation of what should be implemented by way of code. And I'm asking that our attorney draft some documents so that we can move forward on bringing these ordinances before the assembly, have a public hearing, as soon as possible.
Are we looking January?
Probably, the first meeting in January would be really good, because I don't think it's not rocket science, none of it.
Just if you ask Judy, have a date for us so we know.
Jewish staff is here, yeah.
Patrice, if we could get a date, I know she's busy, but we could just get a date, like the first or second meeting in January, the first meeting in February. I don't want things to die because we just don't get around to it.
Right.
Keep track and appreciate it.
Yeah, were you able to get all the references on this? Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any problems with what she wants codified? We'll discuss it. You want to go over now what can be policy issues?
I think all the other recommendations that I didn't suggest we put in code can be policy, but we need to have a policy written up. Municipality administration has policies and procedures, lots of them, and maybe we can just establish a policy and procedure, and on behalf of the assembly and our actions, and just have it as part of the administration's series of policies and procedures. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, ma'am. Dropping down to 4 now, Code of Conduct, current code 2.30, rules of procedure for assembly. I think you all have a copy of it.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Assembly already has by code rules of procedure, and it's pretty extensive. Municipal Attorney Dennis Whaler also made some recommendations on some other rules and procedures, and what my suggestion is that we look at his recommendations, we can do it now, and see what we think should be added to our code, but whatever we decide from Dennis's suggested rules of procedure should be codified and inclusive of what already exists in the code, as chapter 2.3, rules of procedure for assembly. Mr. Chairman.
Can we go line by line on this? You guys want to discuss this draft going line by line?
Maybe paragraph.
Paragraph by paragraph, okay. Let's drop down then. At the Assembly's regular meeting, there are 3 different opportunities to speak to the Assembly. Appearance requests, public hearings, and participation. Any comments on that, Jennifer?
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, if I may. It looks like maybe all 3 of these are recommendations that the task force had that are already talked about codifying. So, Patrice, if you can ask our attorney, Ms. Tucker, to look at 1 through 3, because it may very well coincide with some of the recommendations that the task force had that I recommend be codified anyway, to be inclusive in 2.30. So. One through
What?
3.
Yeah. Speaking to the assembly, the next paragraph. Yes, ma'am.
Can I throw one thing in? Under the appearance request, these are for one person or a group to talk to the assembly. Can we make sure that does not include community councils?
I'm not clear.
Why would you
Chairman,
not want
what
community
Where are you
council?
at? You're on appearance request?
Yes.
What's your,
Oh, it's, never mind. Never mind, forget it.
Yeah.
okay,
Forget it.
sorry.
Sorry, I apologize.
All right. Any comments on speaking to the assembly, Jennifer? No? I want to drop out this, a light in front of you will signal when your time is up. I've been through a lot of some of these where that system dies. And I'm sorry, we'll have a new system next week or next month. It changes. It doesn't always work. So to tell them, your light, the light's gonna change in front of you when your time's up, assumes it's always gonna be the same system or always work. So, you can leave it in there if you want, I'm just telling you sometimes the lights don't work.
Mr. Chair, if I may, I don't, taking that out is no big deal, it really isn't, because the chair, whoever the chair is, reminds the person speaking that your time is up anyway, so.
I just don't want someone to say the light didn't turn red. I can keep speaking. And I had that happen one time with a lady who used to come and complain all the time. She doesn't show up at some of these anymore. Anyway, we take that one out. Ms. Teresa Overmeyer. Okay, code of conduct. Assembly chamber persons may not be abusive or profane language, harass other members of the public or staff verbally or physically, engage in disruptive behavior, yelling, clapping, booing, shouting, hissing. Dennis came up with all these?
I like the skateboard roller line wheels.
I know it. Display signs of shooting material that are not approved by the assembly chair. Are we trying to say you have to have what you're going to give the assembly approved by the chair before you hand it out?
I think it is referring more to like posters
Right.
and
protest.
display items,
Yeah,
which is a policy that
it's already in place.
already somewhat in place in the
Yeah.
chambers, so. But just,
What do you guys think about that?
I remember, I can't remember which administration it was this one or the past one, where they were trying to put up posters and displays, and the chairman said no, because it was Assembly's chamber and it wasn't appropriate, so I.
yeah,
It
that
was
was
this
just a couple months ago.
Yeah.
I could see it for displays, but if they want to just hand out material information to us.
But they can always do that through the clerk.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I don't think that this is referring,
I just want to make sure that we tell them they can hand anything they want out by giving it to the clerk. I just don't want to set a system up where the chairman can pre-screen what comes from the public to the assembly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This code of conduct part in the assembly chamber, I don't think any of this should be codified. What I think should happen with this is we should have something in the assembly chamber so that people can see, maybe in more than one place, so they can see what the code of conduct is when they're in the assembly chambers, but I definitely don't think we should put this in code. And we may need to look at this and see what should or should not be eliminated. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
We could have this written down.
Mr. Trainee,
Yes.
does the distribution of materials extend so far as to stickers and the like? Because that's a
We
free,
have never stopped people from
Okay.
putting stickers on their clothes because it's a time-honored tradition for this assembly.
okay,
When I see a bus on somebody's shirt, I know they're here to talk about bus,
all right.
you know, or AO 37, no on 37. That's not disruptive, that's just a way for us to see and gauge how many people have that little emblem on their clothes.
Just wanna make sure. Thanks.
Not a problem with me.
Something follow up.
Go ahead, Ellie.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So what happened at the Assembly meeting, for those who don't know, is somebody actually got up during the meeting and put an easel up and then put, a big poster up. And that kind of behavior is what we're talking about, not
Okay.
being permitted. Unless somebody is testifying and they have visuals to show the body and the citizens. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, we'll see
I
about putting.
kinda wanna do the roller skating.
That would be kind of fun, wouldn't it?
Yeah. I've always wanted one of those shoes that the little kids have the wheels.
I know, I got some for grandkids, those are great. I'm afraid at my age, they have to have paramedics nearby. If these kids are great on those rollers on the shoes,
Yeah.
they're gone.
And just think, going down the chambers,
Distributing paper.
I won't do it.
Could have fun. Okay. Users will be asked to refrain from any behavior from the judgment of the assembly chair that disrupts the environment for others. Law is just common sense stuff. We'll just get it put up in June.
I'm just trying to think, there has been, we've always had sort of interesting public thing, but there's been, like, people in the chambers who actually are badgering the folks who are being a public hearing or inappropriate annex behind them or whatever. I don't know if this is in here or not.
I don't think we can legislate good behavior,
Yeah,
because we all know who they are. We've seen them over the years at the assembly meetings. And sometimes we've just had to ask them to refrain from doing it. I don't want to see somebody disrupting somebody else speaking. If you don't like what they're saying, just shut up, because 2 minutes later, 3 minutes later, somebody else will come up and say something you really don't like.
the other thing that's not in here, and, I mean, there's been a policy not to clap,
Yeah.
and a policy not to catcall or whatever, and it isn't in here.
We need to have it in there.
It says clapping.
Yeah.
Third bullet down.
Yeah.
It's a second and a
Third
third.
bullet.
Oh, I see, never mind, it's all there.
I know the public likes clapping because they think it shows support for the person speaking, but quite frankly, it delays the time and just gets a little crazy. The chairman has to bring his gavel down, and I did it when I was chairman, just the way Ernie's doing it now, asking the people to refrain from applause, because it's not a bar. It's assembly chambers. We want to treat it a little differently. Anyway, we'll get this put out. Okay, moving on down, we've got AO 13-131, an ordinance to the Anchorage Municipal Assembly. Yes, Ellie?
Mr. Chairman, before we move to the next subject, okay, can we just go over exactly what is gonna happen in terms of recommendations?
Go ahead.
Okay. All right, so just, and I wanna give the task force an opportunity to say something about that. Thank you.
And on that note, Mr. Andy showed up.
Yeah. So anyway, what's gonna happen right now is our attorney, Ms. Tucker, is going to draft legislation for all the points that we mentioned a moment ago that we believe should be in codes, with the hopes of having that ordinance, or those ordinance, whatever it takes, introduced early next year, either sometime in January or first meeting in February. So that's the plan in terms of what could be codified. And the second issue that we decided upon is the code of conduct in the assembly chambers. Everything that a person may not, we're gonna have placards, if you will, made and placed around the assembly chambers, so when people come to the assembly chambers, they can see what the code of conduct is, because we didn't feel that any of this needs to be codified, but just the placard placed somewhere.
Or Amanda, if you could have the clerk's office take rules, plaque, and put it on the kiosk, just so we'll let the people know.
Yeah, we can work on that.
I appreciate that.
And the third thing we talked about was expanding on what's already in code, chapter 2.30, the assembly rules of procedure, and taking some of the recommendations and implementing them into this chapter of the code if appropriate, because I think that 1 through 3 recommendations for code of conduct that Mr. Wheeler presented to us, I think that some of that already exists. But if it doesn't, these are really, 1 through 3 are really good recommendations, and that we would implement them into our code that already exists. And,
Clarification question. Do you want these code of conduct as it stands, or does the rules committee want to review it and create its own?
well, first off, any ordinances that are gonna be drafted are gonna be drafts. that we're
No,
gonna-
I'm referring to the code of conduct that you asked the clerk's office to print and place in the chambers.
No, I know what you're talking about, and what I said was that there are 3 areas on the first page, 1 through 3, that can possibly be implemented in our already existing code, 2.30.
I think we're misunderstanding each other.
Okay.
The code
And
of
maybe I
conduct.
maybe I didn't understand the direction, so I thought that you wanted
These down here.
those at the bottom.
Oh, at the bottom.
And I just wanted to, before, I'm gonna go start working on this, if this is the direction, if these, as they are written, are what you want, or if the rules committee would like to.
Thank you. I didn't obviously understand what your question was. You're talking about the placard.
Yeah,
not the
because I'd
code.
like to
Okay.
work
All
on
right.
that. and get it
Well,
done.
do we want to take another look at it and then get some input from the Citizens Task
Yeah,
Force?
see if there's any other.
Or any proposed changes, I'd be happy to incorporate that.
What I would suggest too, Amanda, is before it's actually printed in place, to let us review it.
Okay, yeah, I'd be happy
If
to
you
do that.
would.
Yeah.
And Jane, if you guys on
I
the
guess that means no
the
steam
Citizen Task Force
here.
would take a look at these, and see if you have anything else we need to add to it. It's pretty inclusive. We'd appreciate it. Yes, ma'am.
What I also think would be a really good idea, Mr. Chairman, is once the documents, the ordinances are drafted, if we could send them to the task force to let them take a review before they're even introduced on the floor, I think that would be a really good idea, get some feedback from you.
That's fine.
Okay.
Jane, you guys have anything else to say to us? Elby wants to make sure I don't ignore you guys, so do you have anything to say?
My colleagues, go for it.
I don't think so. Here,
Thank you for moving forward on it.
Thank you for moving
Right.
forward.
very much so. Elsie, I think what you went through is great.
Do you have anything you want to add to
What
them?
we're trying to do, is we asked you guys to look through all this, and we really want to take your recommendations and put them into effect. So it's not just a committee that does nothing. Because you guys are way too talented to spend time on something that doesn't get done.
No, but I think you're giving it the proper consideration. I appreciate that.
And that's the reason I asked for the time, because I want to make sure that we have it coming back in a good time frame so we get it implemented.
Additionally, when you receive a draft from your attorney, if you could forward it to us, and we'd be happy to give you some feedback on that as you're
That'd be
looking
great.
at it.
That was my suggestion, absolutely.
Right.
And, Jane, you just got your, I want you to take a look at what I marked on this that says codified, and that's what the draft ordinance is gonna be all about.
Terrific.
Arliss, anything from you, ma'am?
No, I concur with the comments that have been made, and I appreciate your
We so much appreciate
sincerity.
having your wisdom and Jane's and all the rest of you in doing this, because this is a problem that creeped up on the Assembly of its own making. And we need you guys to help chart our way out of here. I think you've done that.
Yeah, well, that was one specific incident, but it kind of opened up the opportunity for review. I think we've been serious about that under Jane's leadership, and I really appreciate your doing something about it.
Thank you. Okay, let's move on. We're now down to item 5 on the agenda, AO 13-131. Mr. Steele, sir. You're it.
I'm it.
You're it. It's your time, sir.
The, we referred these to the Rules Committee, these two actions, once they were separated. The second action after the amendment was the original section 2. All right. We brought this forward in a format that was probably not the best format for really what we wanted to do. We needed to separate out the two functions. One is to change the generalized notification of assembly action to put a matter on the ballot for disposal of park lands. That was one item, and the other one was the specific item of Uri Park and their needs for going forward to try and build a building on parkland and get a long-term lease. So there were those two actions, and we're hoping that you can look first at the Uri Park matter. I know there's some folks here that want to say some things about it, and then make the recommendations and bring that back next week to the assembly. On the larger item of general parkland disposal and the time required for notice of assembly action to put the matter on the ballot. That I hope you will also be able to take testimony on and even carry it over perhaps to another meeting with proper notice or substantial notice to allow folks to testify on that in general, because there seems to be a number of people who want to testify on that item specifically.
Here, Mr. Chairman, Tim, refresh my memory, okay? Both of these are still on the floor? I thought we dealt with Uri.
Well, Uri, we dealt with the amendment that basically took the larger issue out of the measure.
Okay, but they're both still on the floor?
And then we closed the public testimony.
And didn't
So
take
we
any
voted,
action?
we voted on the amendment.
And that's it, but they're both still on the floor?
Both still on the floor, but it should be coming back next time. And I believe the public hearing has been closed.
I don't think we closed the public hearing.
Oh, yeah, you did.
The public hearing was closed, no action was taken
closed?
beyond the amendment and referral to,
So it kind of comes back to us as what, unfinished business?
Yeah.
It'll be,
an 11 item.
yeah.
And I'm hoping we separate those items so that they, because the general one needs, I think, more public testimony. Although there are people that disagree with me on that too.
Well, with this amendment, you've made the site specific.
Yes.
And this is to get this on the ballot. And could you give the history of why, I mean, they were supposed to start construction last summer, and why it wasn't, was it just they didn't know all the hoops they had to?
Well, since we don't do a lot of this public land issues, the way this came up is we were in a meeting at Parks and Rec, and an attorney brought up the fact that we weren't going to make it this year because we had this long 6-month public notice. When you want to dispose of park land, it has to be a vote of the people, but it was a 6-month notice of the assembly action to put it on the ballot, and so it worked out to that it would be another year before they would be able to do it, and so that's why it came up, and the general item as well, but specific for Uri Park, they were trying to get a long-term lease. And the city's doing some other actions as well in terms of changing the zoning, combining parcels and things like that. But they wanted to upgrade their facility, build a new building, and everybody was surprised by the requirement.
And what's the history as far as the lions in this park? How long have
They've been right there in that area for 30 years, I think, a long time anyway, and their building's pretty run down, and they would like to build a new building, but they feel they need a long-term lease in order to do so, and so that's the issue.
Anything else?
And I hope you'll take some testimony on that too.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So don't go away, Tim, just for clarity for me and the ordinance, okay? Your original ordinance was basically not just to deal with Uri Park, but to change the code requirements, period, correct, right? Okay, and so there was some resistance, and so thus came the amendment to make your ordinance specific to Uri Park only, correct?
Quite frankly, it was due to my lack of experience that was
Well,
combined
that's
together in
okay,
the first
you
place.
know.
But I did have an amendment in my hot little hand. The ordinance as presented to the assembly had 30 days as the, changing it from a 180-day notice to 30 days. And I had an amendment to change that to 90 days, which I did not use at that meeting. But my belief is that 180 days before the assembly takes action on putting it on the ballot was excessive. So
Right, but if I can continue, Chairman, yeah, I'm not making any, pointing any fingers at you because you're new. That's not the point. I'm just trying to make it clear to everybody what we're dealing with right now.
Yep.
So anyway, what we did was change language in the ordinance to make it specific to Uri Park, period, for now. Right.
for that particular action,
Yeah,
yes.
and so, unless there's resistance, and we need to hear, yeah.
We're gonna listen.
I have no issue with that going forward, but I think what we need to do is the original ordinance, whatever's on the floor, we need to postpone indefinitely and maybe bring it back and go through the public process
That would be
extensively.
okay as well.
So that's my thoughts on
I don't have
this.
a problem.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I think we should make this site-specific.
Let's open up the public testimony. We've got some people who are going to testify, at least one guy wants to testify. Come on up and take a chair.
Well, I don't know that I need a chair,
And,
but, and I will try not, I'll
and
try
don't
not
worry
to
about
get
the
off
3
topic.
minutes. And if one of our eyes start glowing, you're over 3 minutes, but don't worry about it.
I live next door.
Where's the red light?
My name's William Marsh. I live
Your
next door
shirt.
to Uri Park. My wife and my family, my neighbors are fairly passionate on this land disposal issue. And we feel as though this shortening of the period to object down to what may be 14 days dramatically reduces our ability to influence how this land disposal happens. So we are very taken aback that we can have our rights at this land disposal time limited so dramatically, because this is something that's favored by Parks and Rec, but is not favored by the neighbors. And this is essentially taking a parcel of property that is zoned R2M, turning it into a PLIP, which is a catch-all zoning that allows everything from ski jumps to beehives to build a facility more than twice the size that's existing and have it be operational, whatever their lease will allow. 50% of it will be warehouse. This will remove the entire park from usage by anybody but the specific user group, and is a dramatic change from what its current use is of less than a 2,000 square foot house sitting in the middle of a 1.88 acre park, of which 50% is below the floodplain. So we're talking about less than 1 acre. It will be the only structure of its kind within the municipality. So this is a dramatic change in land use. And at the Planning and Zoning Commission meeting, every one of the people that spoke on the planning board said this would be a non-starter if it was anything but the Park Service offering this building up for building. So this is a big issue for the homeowners. This was a subject of a 1-hour debate at the Spenard Community Council meeting. It passed by 1 vote from the guy yelling, "Give the Lions what they want." This has not got widespread support because it's a tiny little parcel in a residential area zoned R2M. The reason for the rezone is to get it to PLIP to go to this 20-year land use contract. This is a substantial change, and we should all have a chance to weigh in against fairly substantial powers that are objecting to it, that are objecting to our input. And that's
How big do you say the park was currently?
1.88 acres. It's been replatted.
And you've got how big of a building on it now?
The building has a footprint of a little over 1,000 square feet.
And how big's the building that they want to put on?
5,260 feet, with 50% of that warehouse. The Lions Club, and what's presented to people is a moving target. It goes from being a community center, which would not be allowed because it doesn't abut a collector street under zoning, but then it goes to being a clubhouse, to a food storage area, to a drop-in eye clinic. It's a moving target for us to object to. So we really would like to have this fully vetted, but what we all bought into our neighborhood is, and this is deep within an R2M, even the current use isn't permitted under an R2M. It would only be allowed under an R3 with a conditional use permit. So because their use predates these codes, and it's been a traditional use, and we're all get-along neighbors, we have understood that this was an activity. But this is a dramatic change. And it can bring traffic constantly to a road that doesn't have storm drains, gutters, or asphalt. We're a wrapped street. There's no sidewalks, there's poor lighting, and this abuts Roosevelt Drive. During the times of use, there's so much use when they did food distribution, you could not move an ambulance down Roosevelt. So this is a big issue to the adjoining neighbors.
Thank you. Questions? LD, anything?
So,
I'm asking that you reopen public testimony if we're going to greatly shorten, which could be 14 days for those few neighbors to object, or let this die and let this issue come up in the normal course of events so that we can muster our opposition to this disposal. It's supposed to be hard to get rid of park property. It's just supposed to be.
So is your recommendation that this committee would send something to the Assembly that says reopen the public testimony on this? Would that make you happy?
Well, I got to tell you, for those that are neophytes, this is a very confusing process, and we're just regular guys. We never thought it would be possible to change the rules so dramatically to limit our ability to object. I think this is, with all respect to Mr. Steele, I think this was badly drafted, and I think it's bad policy to change the policy of getting rid of a park from 180 days to 14 in some cases. We all need access to get our neighbors to come and testify, to draft intelligent responses, and to stay on point, because we all tend to wander a bit. I would really like the ability to, as the current code is, to object over 180 days. And to back up a little bit of history, the Lions Club actually owns the property next to the park. They cannot build their facility on their own property because of zoning issues. They want to then take the park and lease it to build a non-conforming structure, and that's our objection all the way through. They already have funding and they already have land that could do a land swap or move to a zoning appropriate location for a warehouse, like every other charity is doing.
So Tim, and their current property is R2A, R2M?
The Bury Park is currently zoned R2M.
No, but the Lions property?
Is R2M, that's the way they bought it or received it as a donation.
And how large of,
It's 1/2 acre, it's the same size as my parcel.
and
They're gonna combine the 3 parcels.
Three
Take
parcels.
a long-term lease on it.
No, that's not quite correct. The park is 3 parcels, 3 half-acre parcels that add up to 1.88 acres. They own parcel number 4, which is adjacent to the park. They already own their own property. Last year, they tried to get the park, and they initially did. The parks donated the parkland to be rezoned R3 for the benefit of them because their lot size does not meet the minimum requirement to go for a spot rezone and conditional use. There's been an awful lot of backdoor playing with this park that the neighborhood wasn't aware of. Quite frankly, and excuse me if that seems unkind, but when the Department of Parks and Rec offered up Bury Park in 2012 to be rezoned R3 to the benefit of this user group's property adjoining it, it all took us by surprise, and that's when I got involved. And that's why I'm here today. We're trying to keep from having a warehouse in our neighborhood. That's our end result. And it's a lot of people with a lot more political power than we do are pushing for this, and it's on a fairly, I was informed that this would be on the April ballot and that the ballot would pass. That's what I was told by my assemblyman. And I don't want to speak out of turn, but that's the truth.
Let me ask you a question. Did you testify at our last Assembly meeting on this? Because I don't remember you.
I did not even know this was a possibility, nor did I know this was being introduced, or I would have been there.
So no one testified?
Because no one knew this was coming. And that's why I spoke to Ms. Ott, the president of the Aspiring Community Council's wife, she didn't even know this was on the agenda coming up before the assembly until after this particular issue had been heard. So we don't feel like we had any kind of notice that we were gonna lose our rights.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much.
This came up at the request of Parks and Rec. We were in that meeting, and all of us, I think, were surprised by it because it was the second meeting we had had on the Uri Park issue, on what the Lions Club wanted to do. They had moved pretty far down the line before I even got elected, but when I came into it, the Lions Club was pushing pretty hard to try and be able to do the construction this next season. And I think Parks and Rec just tried to accommodate, and that's kind of like what's fast-tracked. Everybody was surprised about the length of notification. You would think the Parks and Rec would know that was an issue. The lease was concerned a taking, and but I was under the impression that their parcel was coming into the mix as well. I thought that all those parcels they were going to replat and then put the park designation, the PLI designation, and that then they would be given the long-term lease. Once, and the process has to go through, P&Z, and they have to have a plat, and so on and so forth. So there's still some things to do. But I know
It has been replatted. Sorry, I don't
it
mean to
has
say
been
that.
replatted.
We spoke at the plating board meeting, and 3 lots were replatted, and the plat was approved.
But not the fourth.
Not the fourth to our
Fourth?
knowledge.
Okay.
So, I'm sorry, I'm not familiar with this part. Its current use what other besides Lions having their facility?
That's all. It's vacant land.
It's vacant, so it's vacant land that is,
No, it's vacant land with a house on it.
Well, the fourth parcel has a
But the
house on it.
fourth parcel, I'm sorry, is vacant land with
so
utilities.
it's vacant, so is it,
It's adjacent to Fish Creek.
Okay.
A steep slope. He's right about usability of the lot. It's not hugely.
I
It is
mean,
across from Roosevelt Park, just off Roosevelt.
so the biggest, it sounds to me, the biggest problem the neighbors have is basically the road and the traffic.
Biggest problem the neighbors have,
I mean,
if I can
besides-
speak for them, and it's not my place to speak for anybody, I realize. We live in a neighborhood,
Yeah.
not a warehouse district.
Right.
Not a place with
Right.
convenience stores or medical facilities. It's a neighborhood. What's on the park now is a house.
Yeah.
The former Barbara Uri residence, Dr. Uri. It was donated, the way it was brought into the municipal land was for the use of the people of Anchorage. It will, with this land use contract, with the rezone and the potential, it will become, for all intents and purposes, the property of the Lions Club. And because of that, this either needs to be fully vetted or struck down. We live in a neighborhood. We would like a neighborhood park, but we don't want to live next to a private club or a warehouse. And it's very important to those of us that adjoin the property as to how this is disposed of.
Anybody else want to testify on this? Oh, Kathy, I knew that. Come on up. She runs around town looking for meetings she can testify in.
Just came from the Heritage Land Bank. Thank you, Kathy Gleason, currently President of Trinity Community Council, and I think what's just been presented to you is indicative of the problem of reducing time when something comes up for the assembly to consider of disposal of parkland, whether it's a trade, whether it's a sell, whether it's a lease. It's a big deal, as you pointed out. This is a big deal, and the bar should be raised very high. And obviously, Mr. Steele was being presented information and probably a proposal that from one perspective sounded like a no-brainer. They've been there for 30 years, no big deal. But because enough time wasn't given to fully vet and perhaps have a thorough dialogue about the pros and cons of this action, he put together a proposal, and then now you're here hearing a different perspective than perhaps what you've heard in the past, previously from other people in the Parks Department. So this goes to reduce, any proposal to reduce disposal of parkland, dedicated parkland, from 180 days to some kind of reduction. There's gonna be consequences to that, and I don't know that the public is best served by that. If this had been going on, I think Tim McGrath testified like a year and a half or something, and then the Assemblyman Chair said, we dropped the ball. Don't let the people end up, coming out on the short end of what should have been a more thorough process to vet this specific item in Spenard. The consideration of postponing indefinitely the section 1 of the ordinance and reducing the loading days. And I don't see any compelling reason to reduce it at all. But if there are some that feels like it should be less than 180 days, this is exactly what the task force recommendation is for. Let's have a public meeting. Let's have a dialogue about this. Not find out, because I just happened to read December 3rd's agenda right before I left for the meeting and saw that, November 17th's assembly meeting, and saw this was being introduced, and 2 weeks later it was on the December 3rd agenda. That is not a way to serve the public on these kinds of proposals. We need to have notice, we need to have dialogues, community councils and other user groups, parkland user groups need to be fully informed about even a hint of a disposal of parkland, big or small, so that we all have an opportunity to get engaged, have dialogue, etc. So I fully support postponing this indefinitely, and I think you've heard eloquently enough about perhaps the Spenard issue. I'm not going to speak to that.
So I have a question.
Jennifer.
You said Spenard Community Council weighed in on this.
They weighed in on the rezoning issue, and my wife and I and my neighbors attended because the Spenard Community Council was asked to rubber stamp the rezone to PLIP.
So Parks or Planning came to the Community Council?
Parks and Recs, Mr. Rada, the Lions Club, and my neighbors and I attended this. And it was a 1 hour plus discussion that was very heated at times about this proposed land use. And it was by no means unanimous in the group as to how to proceed, just on the approval of the zoning. And at that time, the one sway vote voted yes in favor of it, because they kept pounding on the fact this is simply a housekeeping measure. But as this debate right here shows, this is not a housekeeping measure. This was designed specifically to allow a non-conforming use in the park, because immediately we're on this issue.
So, and to access to it, do you access it by Spenard Road, or do you access from Tudor?
Technically, to access Uri Park, you come down Taft off of Spenard Road, heading south about 4 blocks. Taft dead ends at Roosevelt. Roosevelt makes a funny jog east and west. It makes a turn west, and to get Uri Park, you take the first driveway on the east side of Taft. It is a small house. That's all it is. Other than the Lions Club sign, you wouldn't know it was there.
Yeah,
Or Northwood
To Roosevelt.
right. So it's not, it doesn't look like there's any access as far as off from Tudor.
No commercial access into it, just neighborhood streets.
If I may just clarify a couple of points. One is community development, and John Rada, and an attorney, one of, I think, Mr. Wheeler's attorneys, were in that meeting. And I don't believe the use is changing. It's the same use that they currently have and have had for 30 years.
That's not genuine, because this construction plan for this park is predicated on this 20-year land contract. They have had a month-to-month, $90 a month lease on this house for 30 years. They now claim it is so dilapidated it will no longer function as their clubhouse. So for 30 years we couldn't maintain the structure, but we can tear it down and build a new one if we get a 20-year lease.
So
That's
what are
the
they
way-
gonna do different than what they're doing?
Mr. Gray Jackson's got a
Thank you,
question.
Mr. Chairman. So the Lions Club had a lease on this house already for
They-
30 years?
For 30 years, I
$90 a
believe
month.
it is $90 a month.
Okay. So their intent then sounds like is to tear down the house and put this building on it?
That's all we're discussing.
Okay.
That's the reason
Thank
we're
you.
here.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Potter, since you're here, I want to get the benefit of your wisdom. You're
And
a
yes, I
land
was
use
at
planner.
P and Z and listened to all this as well, and.
So tell me, sir, from your perspective, you're a planner.
If the, well, I'll broad brush several things. First off, if that building goes down, they lose any of their non-conforming rights to be on that lot and have something that's not a permitted principal use. So the act of taking that down without the rezone happening and other approvals happening, they can't do it. So when there's a discussion about it being the same use, it's really not the same use, and it's a larger use, so the intensity goes up, and all those things are supposed to be taken into account. That's why this type of use is supposed to be adjacent to a collector street, because you've got additional traffic. Now, I think it's the warehouse component and the uses and activities that go along with that that have the neighbors concerned, because that will dramatically change how the traffic comes already to a very narrow, non-curb and guttered, no storm drainage type of street. The creek basically cuts this piece of property off from Tudor Road. From a long-term planning standpoint, just because it's a cheap or inexpensive piece of property and you've been there for a while, because you've been there for a while doesn't mean it, to change it is the best use for yourself or the community. And, you know, I would hope that through the process that everybody that's looking at it, because you've got two things. You've got the issue of dealing with this specific issue and how much time you should have to consider it going to a vote of the people, and the generic thing overall. Now, we went through a very similar thing at Sisterhood Park, adjacent to this Bernard Rec Center. That was a land swap, a rezone, all kinds of things to accommodate a new soccer field, getting parking and circulation straightened out, and allow American Fast Freight to have a better adjacency of their property, so everybody gained. We went through that whole thing. Is 180 days probably too much in a lot of cases? I think it's too much. You could probably do it in 90 or 120 days, and that 180 days can flip you to get off a cycle for your election to the point where you really are now into a year and a half to try and get anything done. So there ought to be some case-by-case flexibility to look at that, but there should be notice. But this specific case, it is an expansion of a use that will have bigger impacts from a traffic standpoint. You know, the reason they want to make it bigger is so they can have more storage, more pickups, more activities. So, you know, I would caution the assembly to, you know, and I don't want to say the Lions are a great group. I fully support them, but it might be better for everybody, including parks long-term, to look at the benefit that that piece of property does have for linkages for that community with a bridge across the creek over to the bike trail, which would be beneficial. So, be cautious.
Mr. Reader.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A couple of comments, if you don't mind. One, I think under the new Title 21, I'm not so sure that demolition of the building extinguishes the use. It used to be under non-conforming uses, if you lost 50% of the structure or more, you couldn't maintain that use. I'm not sure if that's still the case under this scenario. Number two, the focus here shouldn't be on the merits of the proposal at this point. The question is how much public notice prior to the assembly taking this up and holding its public hearings. So while I appreciate that the community has concerns about the merits, the real focus is on the length of notice. Clearly in this particular case, the community is very much engaged already. So what the proposal is looking for is how long should that notice period be for this particular case? And not so much the merits itself, because that's still something the body, the full assembly is gonna have to debate if it has this ordinance in front of it specific to the proposition itself, which is the lease issue. At that point, when that proposition comes to you, then of course, everybody's gonna wanna jump in on what the merits of this lease proposal look like.
So we have until February to get it on the ballot, right?
No, it's gonna have to be introduced at your first January meeting so you can get the public hearing.
Is there anybody else who wants to testify on this issue? Yes, Carolyn?
I would like to caution length of time and shortening it by too much. I understand what Mr. Potter's saying about election cycles and that kind of stuff makes perfect sense. But when you look at only 90 days or less, you run into a problem where community councils especially don't meet over the summertime. So when things are proposed, it's a lot harder to get the word out. And when you're working in a group as a private citizen and you are not a planner, you are not a land use person, to try and research all of this data, to try and understand it when you work a 40-hour-a-week job on top of it all is really complex and complicated. And to shorten the public's time to really work on that kind of a project, I think is detrimental to the public to be able to tell you what they really think because they've had the proper time.
But if you went for kind of a happy compromise, maybe 120 days, which allows you to bridge a summer issue, it still gives you, a month. And the public process doesn't mean that it's a done deal. It means that just that it's the time for the public to be engaged. It doesn't even begin to address the public process that goes on within the assembly. And the movement, as Mr. Luke said, of the local or whatever issue it is.
Yes, ma'am.
I don't live there, I live in Peters Creek, but listening to this gentleman testify, talking about their attempts to rezone as many as 2 years ago, it feels to me like these people have clearly known what the deadlines were, they just haven't complied with them. They had to have known what the deadline was to submit the language. 180 days, they've known all along it took 180 days to get it on the ballot. They just have not chosen to abide by that and instead have chosen to try to use their influence to circumvent that 180 days. I find that just a little specious. It just doesn't seem right. They've been at this for years and now they're trying to pretend like they're up against a crunch. It's self-inflicted.
Dennis?
Sorry, for the record, Mr. Chairman, the code change, I think, extending this time period was enacted in 2007, so I certainly wasn't familiar with it in my previous stint here. Spinard Lines and John Rada were not aware of it until one of my attorneys was assigned to the project and advised them of such back in, October maybe? Whenever it was, but it was already past the deadline, so it was just, actually, we just weren't aware of the application of that code provision to the situation, so.
We've got some good young attorneys then.
Yes, absolutely.
Yes, Mr. Potter?
This is something that doesn't happen very often, but I can tell you that the Parks and Rec Department went through a similar activity for the 70 acres between 100th Avenue and O'Malley, just west of C Street. When they were looking to do a land trade, it went through a public vote, was approved. So that was after 2007, I believe, or very close to it. That requirement was in play at the time. Sisterhood Park, which happened about 1.5 years, 2 years ago, is also fairly recent, and I'm fairly confident that the city attorney's office, may not have been Dennis, was aware of it because we all discovered it going through the process that it was dedicated park and it had to be done that way. So I think that it's little known. Maybe a lot of people don't have a lot of exposure to it, but it is known.
Thank you. Anybody else wish to testify on this? You're not hearing anybody, then we've got to make a decision to get back to the Senate. Our point of view on this.
Right, and if I may, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to hear the author of the ordinance's thoughts on, after hearing what, the citizens in this community had to say.
I understand everybody's concerns, and from my point of view, it is a measure to accommodate. I don't think the Lions Club had a clue about that, about the ordinance, the timing. They didn't even have a clue or we're not up to speed in terms of the fact that the community development was going to combine the parcels and change the zoning, replat, change zoning, to public public land use. And so I don't think there's any sinister motive behind them just wanting to get something done. And so on this particular measure, on the Uri Park issue, I would prefer to go on. We could open the hearing and take some testimony again at the meeting, but I think we have to take action one way or another on that particular item, or I would like to take action on a particular item at our next meeting. And but as far as the generalized change of the time for disposal of parklands, I think we need to fully vet that public testimony.
Thank you, sir. Jennifer, Elby?
I think personally, I think we need to reopen the public hearing.
I think our recommendation is going to be the chair, when they reopen the public hearing, this item.
And have you folks looked at any other land swaps, or has anybody?
I don't think that anybody's looked at land swaps with regards to that. I think it's just the Lions Club would like to do something, and
I'm just thinking
there
that,
it is.
that you do have, on the other side, on the Tudor side, as you get down towards this Bernard Rec Center, and I wouldn't want to go into Sisterwood Park, but there might be something that's a little bit more industrial that could maybe.
It would be nice to get community development and parks to testify on this, to clarify.
Yeah,
all of this.
I think that would be, but I definitely think you need to reopen.
Do you agree?
Yeah, I do, but I think Arlo's had something to say, and then Dennis.
but
No, you don't, well, Dennis just raised his hand.
Rose, did you have something you wanted to say, man? Dennis?
One thing on reopening, the scenario would be that if you reopen it, if the assembly chooses to reopen on the 17th, then the public hearing itself wouldn't occur to the 14th,
Right.
in which case you'd already have to have the AO for the proposition at least introduced at that point, just keep things moving on a
Yeah.
timely schedule, so keep that in mind. That's not difficult to do, I'm just saying it would have to be done.
On the other hand, I guess you could look at it where if we didn't reopen it and we addressed this issue on Tuesday, and if it did pass the assembly, the second bite at the apple is when we look at putting it on the ballot as far as a public hearing for the specific.
That would be probably the most important bite of the apple, if you will, because that's
Right.
where you get into the merits of this Bernard Alliance proposal
Right, versus.
versus
Well,
the public
and
notice.
you're still, I heard what you're saying on this ordinance, that it wasn't on the specific purpose, but in some respects it is, because the way we amended it, it focused it down to this specific project as far as the actual notification.
The other thing I was going to say, if you don't mind, was, and I have to get the file, pull this out, maybe Mr. Steele knows off the top of his head, but I believe that the municipality acquired the property from somebody who donated it to the municipality with the understanding that the Lions could be there.
So that was, I was gonna ask
So that's a
that.
question. So I know there's some conversation about whether or not
You
they
do the
could be
research
somewhere else.
for us and let us know on
Yeah.
Tuesday.
Yeah,
Dennis.
yeah, I'm trying to bring the file with me, but,
It would be extremely helpful. If I could get that intent language.
that's why I was just saying, it's something in my mind that was the way the donation was made.
They showed actually, it's a protected document for us to transmit to the chairman. This is, we're going to send this back and ask them.
Well, except, what you're gonna have to do, if we do, and Dennis is right, what we do is if we reopen it, we'll reopen it for January 14th. And so we'd be doing a public hearing on this and putting it on the ballot the same day, so you know, what you could do, but you're already getting the public on the ballot.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. The two people who testified, okay, you've been hearing the conversation right now. And I really like to know your thoughts on it, and if what was said is clear to you in terms of the process.
If you're asking me, I
I'm
have
asking
no
both.
idea where we are right now.
Okay, let me kind of tell you
She'll
what.
explain it to you.
Yeah. Anyway, right now, we're talking about, the committee's talking about reopening public hearing, because we hear your concerns, okay? We want to give the citizens an opportunity to be heard. If we reopen public hearing, we're gonna have to start all over again, advertise for 2 weeks, and the public hearing won't happen until January 14th. At the same time, if the Assembly decides to send this issue to the citizens through a ballot proposition, we're gonna have to introduce the ballot proposition at the same time that the public hearing is gonna be reopened on this document. So, we'll have 2 documents on the floor is the bottom line, for, public hearing and for debate and approval by the Assembly. That's the bottom line.
This will give you another chance, because you weren't there the first time, to discuss this and bring your neighbors in, discuss this with us.
So this will be, we will be discussing both the shortened time for public posting for this ballot measure. Is that correct? And then we will also be discussing the proposed ballot measure at the same time.
The ballot measure will be introduced.
The ballot measure will be.
On the 14th.
Introduced for actually, it'll give you 2 bites. It'll be introduced for,
You can
so you'd
testify at our
have
next
2
meeting.
weeks. You'd have 2 public hearings within 2 weeks.
If I may, Mr. Chairman, so my suggestion would be, because either way, we're gonna have another public hearing, okay? Why even reopen the public hearing on this? My suggestion is that we postpone action on this, introduce, because of deadlines, the ordinance to put a ballot proposition, and then everybody come out and testify, and we're dealing with, both issues actually at the same time.
It would make sense to deal with the first with the ballot measure on the merits to find out whether it's worth reducing.
Right,
the
because
public.
we'll postpone this, and you'll be able to testify, not January 14th, but January 28th, or whatever the next meeting is. And then that'll give us enough time to make sure the public knows that this is on the agenda, this is your opportunity to come out and testify on the Uri Park issue.
Okay, and I realize this is informal, and you guys are really being kind to us that aren't too bright on this issue.
We're doing our job,
We work for you.
that's what we're
Not
doing.
the other way around.
Here's my problem is not specific. What you just said is the most reasonable thing I've heard since this process started, by the way. There's a number of us that have to be in and out of town, and this is a really important issue. I don't think the Assembly revolves around me. I don't think the world revolves around me. I don't know whether I will be in town the last week of February or January. So, and that's what's caught us all by surprise with these short issues, is it's very, very difficult. And I don't think the world has to revolve around me, but we would like our chance to be heard.
So actually, if we had a public hearing on this ordinance on the 14th, then you have 2 bites at the apple.
And then when would the next one come up on the,
January 14th, and then it would come again on January 28th.
and I'm out of town.
But
But that's not
we
your
can
problem.
take your testimony by sending your testimony, written testimony to our clerk. We'll make distribution to the entire assembly. There are other ways to deal with it, or you can request an appearance request in front of the assembly by calling the clerk. At our next assembly meeting, you can have 3 minutes to talk about something coming up in the future.
Okay,
Because it's
well,
not
and
in front of us that night.
I appreciate that, and like I said, it's a learning
Yes,
curve for
Kathy.
us.
Well, now I'm totally confused, and I need like a flow chart. Since you haven't changed the 180-day notice requirement yet, I don't see how you could say, but if we just move it to January 14th or whatever, I've lost track of the dates, that's not even close to 180 days. So until you, if and when you would reduce the notice requirement for this particular item, you can't put the ordinance to say, let's put this on the ballot, and the ordinance to reduce to 14 days all at the same time and expect it to kind of happen. I guess you literally have to approve the 14-day notice and then open up the hearing on the merits of the case.
Well, conveniently, Mr. Reader's raising his hand.
Maybe he can clarify.
So, yeah, it's the public notice before final assembly action. I think what I will advise the departments to do is to put the notice out now, that there'll be a public hearing on the merits of the Spenard Lyons proposal on the meeting of the 28th. If the assembly decides not to not to shorten the notice period, then they won't be able to take final action on that item, and it won't make the ballot this coming year. If the assembly decides that shortening the notice is okay, then we'll have given as much notice as we can, starting this week or next week, whenever they get the notice done, and it'll move forward. So either way, we've covered the bases, so we've given as much notice as we can, starting ASAP. If the assembly is okay with that after public hearing, they'll have the document to put Spenard Lyons issue on the ballot. If it's not okay, that item will have to just float until the next election.
Elby?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The one thing that we need to do, okay, is get our acts together on what it is we really need to do to make this happen and give the public an opportunity to testify, because we do not want to be on the floor trying to figure it out on Tuesday.
Amen.
So let's just make sure we get it together, you know, what we need to do before the meeting on Tuesday, and we can do that offline.
And then with regard to the change from 180 days to something less than, are you indefinitely postponing that?
No, we're
sorry.
sending it
I
back,
hear you saying it again, I went somewhere else.
sending it back to the assembly to hold hearing on it.
I'm sorry, what?
No, you're saying the overall, as far as changing designated park to other, if we're gonna change for timeframe, not specific to this
Not
project.
specific to this case, but Mr. Steele's overall recommendation, the section 1 that you amended to delete,
Let's come back in front of the
are
assembly.
you going to consider a resolution that would reduce that and have a hearing next Tuesday, or January 14th, or whatever day, or are you postponing that indefinitely? Or proposing to postpone it indefinitely?
No, if I may, Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead.
I would recommend that we postpone that indefinitely and deal with the Erie Park issue solely for right now.
And is that the committee's full recommendation?
Yeah, I mean, I think if it's something that needs to come up in the future, we can
We can deal
do
with
it
that separately.
more.
I'd hope that we could have comment from Mr. Roddick and Mr.
We
Reed.
can make it a work session on it and just see where we're going.
Well, if we're done,
Okay.
I'm gonna adjourn this meeting. You got an appointment at what, 3 o'clock? You're out here on time.
It's not gonna take.
Thank you guys for being here.
Thank
Thanks, Jennifer.
you, Mr. Chairman.